So I'm going to talk about belief in fake news, where I'm defining fake news as content that is deliberately created to mislead. I'm going to focus what I talk about the United States, because that's where I've done my research. It may be the things I'm going to talk about generalized to other cultures, but I'm not going to presume that. So I'm going to start by talking about news on social media. It turns out surveys show about 60% of American adults get their news on social media. 83% are confident they can tell the difference between real and fake news. Yet about a quarter of those have accidentally or intentionally shared fake news. So the first and most fundamental question that we started with in our research project, I'm working with a bunch of faculty colleagues and PhD students, is can we detect fake news? People say they can. Why don't we see if they can? Theory would suggest that as we look at any information, and news is no different, we will be biased in our beliefs. We'll be more likely to believe information that aligns with our current beliefs, whether that's about political news or other types of news. Theory also says that this confirmation bias is strengthened when we are in an hedonic mindset, when we are seeking pleasure as we are on Facebook. When we read Facebook, we do so for entertainment, as opposed to when we are in a utilitarian mindset, such as reading product reviews or health information or other types of information. So we started with a very basic study. We studied undergraduates in the Kelley School of Business here at IU, which interestingly enough are representative of the political views across the United States. Half are self-declared, self-identified Democrats, half are Republicans, and a third say they would vote for Donald Trump today. So they are a microcosm of what we see in US politics. We brought them in and we showed them 50 headlines that were circulating in the news at the time that we did the study. 30 of those were true, and 20 of those were false. Of the ones that were true, 10 were ones that we were convinced at the start of the study our undergrads would be able to identify as true. Sad thing, 2 months later when we finished the study, we were no longer convinced that those 10 headlines were unequivocally true. The political landscape has changed. So we started by trying to say, can they identify true from false? So our baseline here is 50%, because you call it one way or the other. It's either true or it's false. So if they were utterly horrible at this, they get about half right, just because that's what you're going to get when you get true-false test. Anybody want to guess how good they were at this? How many people think they were really good at this? How many people think they were, not bad at this? How many people think they sucked? You are pessimists, but unfortunately, you are correct. This is the number of people who got each percentage correct. I want to focus your attention down here. These are the people who are better than chance. We would expect most people to be no worse than chance, but most people were worse than chance at identifying whether a story on social media was true or false. So there's one important takeaway here. People are really bad at doing this. However, we have a technology that will improve your chance of determining whether a story is true or false. I can give it to you. It's a cheap technology, and it is guaranteed to improve your ability to determine whether a story is true or false. You are better off flipping a coin than you are using your own judgment, because your judgment is clouded by your confirmation bias. You are more likely to believe what you want to believe. So John Mellencamp got it right when he said in a song, Walking Tall, Walk Tall, people will believe what they want to believe when it makes no sense at all. So prior beliefs distort what we believe to be true and false. If you will, we prefer a reassuring lie over an inconvenient truth. And given that we can choose what we see online, and we can choose to watch the TV programs we want. We're seeing how fake news is shaping the political discourse in the United States and perhaps elsewhere. One of the things we did was we looked at what happened when people looked at fake and true stories in our lab experiment. We had them hooked up to an EEG headset so we could see what cognition went on. So we looked at what cognition was happening in the frontal cortex, which is the stuff, I'll use a lay term here, it's associated with thinking or cognition. Whenever you're actually thinking about something, the frontal cortices are active. So we looked at this region after they had finished reading the headline. So they read the headline, and then what happened next? If you can interpret EEG data, you see the story. If not, I'll simplify it. We had two cases, when the story supported their beliefs and when it didn't. There were statistically significant differences. When the story supported our subjects' beliefs, both frontal cortices were highly active. When the story did not support their beliefs, nothing. People stopped thinking. So they paid attention to the stories that aligned with their beliefs, and they tuned out of ones that challenged. So one of the questions we had was, how can we make things better? One approach is perhaps source ratings. We can put ratings on sources of news, and those sources that produce fake news, intentionally false content, will be rated poorly, assuming the ratings are done properly. And I can talk about different rating style, but that's beyond the scope of what I want to talk about. Here's a sample. Here's a headline on social media, Facebook, and you can see in the upper right corner, we put a source reliability measure. Again, many different ways of doing this. I can tell you what one seemed to work and don't. That's not the focus of what I'm going to talk about. I'm interested in whether people pay attention to ratings. So we did a survey, and we did an online experiment of people in the United States. So this is everybody across the United States. Political spectrum was represented, age was represented. And what we found was that the belief in the news, the belief in the story, the extent to which they thought the story was true was influenced by a variety of factors, but I'm going to draw your attention to those. What you'll see is ratings help. So if we put source ratings on it, people in the United States are more likely to believe ones that are rated highly and less likely to believe stories from sources rated low. So if you will, there's some good news here. People pay attention to ratings. We are used to seeing ratings online for Amazon and eBay. It flows over into the news environment as well. And there's some caveats there, but in general, it seems to work. However, I do want to point out the other term that was significant in predicting belief. It was confirmation bias. These are standardized coefficients in a mixed level model, which means it shows you the relative weight. Confirmation bias is stronger. It's about 50% stronger than the ratings. So confirmation still has an effect, and a more powerful effect than ratings. We looked at that actions that people would take on fake news, whether they would read it, share it, like it, or post a comment that supported or opposed the particular headline. Again, I'm going to draw your attention to two things. The belief in the article, yes, so belief influenced the extent to which they would share it. And if we're trying to stop the spread of fake news, this is an important finding because it says if we can do something to mitigate belief, they'll stop sharing. Confirmation bias also played a major role in sharing of news evidence. These are standardized coefficients. We can compare their strengths. I want to draw your attention to three things. The strength of confirmation bias versus the strength in the belief. You are twice, the effect of confirmation bias has twice the effect on your liking an article than if you believe it. You will like an article even if you don't believe it, as long as it aligns with you. So we're not out of the woods on this. Rating helps, but confirmation bias still leads to the spread of fake news. So we have a fundamental problem. Confirmation bias leads to belief. Belief leads to action. And confirmation bias has a direct effect over and above belief on action. Confirmation bias drives fake news. So to me, this leaves us with a fundamental question about social media and fake news on social media. And the question is fake news the internet equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater? Here in the United States, that is our level of protection for speech. You can say anything you want, but you can't cry fire in a crowded theater because of the consequences. So I think it is now time that we begin a conversation about fake news, content created to intentionally mislead, and whether that is the internet equivalent of shouting fire. Because we can't detect it, our belief is driven by confirmation bias, and there are meaningful consequences for fake news. And we can go for Pizzagate. That's where someone believed a right-wing conspiracy theory that a pizza restaurant in Washington, D.C. was being run by the Democrats as a cover for child prostitution. He believed it because that's what was circulating in his universe. He grabbed a gun and he went to the restaurant to rescue the children. He shot up the restaurant. Fortunately, nobody was killed. There are many other examples where fake news has led to real and fatal consequences in the real world. So I'm going to end on that note.
Okay, thank you very much.